Once again the Major was left to potter about his room and to think. And once more he exclaimed to himself that there, in a manner of speaking, they all were, only that the deuce of the matter was that he couldn't in the least tell in any manner of speaking where in the world it was that they could be said to be, and he certainly hadn't got any hot water, and he knew that he would go without it, for he was pretty certain that that young lady wouldn't answer his bell again. He was, therefore, just beginning to take off his coat, when, with a little click, the electric lights went out, and he grumbled vigorously that it was only in a house tenanted by his aunt that you could be certain of having no water, and equally certain of having no light. The fire had rather died down, so that it was pretty darkish as he strolled across the room in a brown study and stretched his hand toward the switch. He couldn't for the life of him make up his mind whether Miss Jenkins was the second woman in the 400 million, or whether she wasn't, as he put it, something altogether too preposterously impossible that she could possibly be. It had affected him like something impossible, really as if he had seen a ghost. He was looking at Miss Flossie Delamar. There wasn't the least doubt that he was looking at Flossie. She was in a peignoir that was a foam of pink. She was standing with her back to a dressing table that was covered with shining things. She was just saying good night to somebody who had just gone out of the room, and she looked exactly like a rather small Olivia out of The Vicar of Wakefield. The walls were all covered with a pink-flowered chintz. The hangings of the four-post bed were all of pink-flowered chintz, and so were the curtains and the valances over the long windows. It was an extraordinary effect, as if it had been sunlight. It was as if he had stepped right straight out of the gloom of the 17th century, bang into the 18th. The panel had just gone. Noiselessly upon its casters it had disappeared, and Major Edward Brent Foster found himself explaining to himself that now he could understand why Mary Saville treasured her house enough to leave her own maid behind her when it contained such perfect treasures of old rooms. For over the high white mantelpiece there was an undoubted Gainsborough, a gentleman in a bright red coat pointing his finger to distant cannon fire. But he hadn't the least hesitation about advancing into the room and exclaiming, "Here, I say, for goodness' sake, Flossie, lend me one of your candles and let me find that blessed knob again." Miss Delamar's eyes became rather wide, and she exclaimed, "Teddy Brent, by all that's wonderful!" "Oh," the Major exclaimed, "why don't you say Teddy Brent, by all that's damnable? You've got to remember that my respectable name is Foster now, and that I am a reformed character." "Well, I didn't ask you to come into my bedroom, Teddy," Miss Delamar said, with a slightly injured air. "I don't object to your being here, but I didn't ask you. Your aunt's just gone. I've been sitting talking to her, or goodness knows what dreadful things you mightn't have seen." "Well, lend me a candle," the Major said. "But what's it all about?" Miss Delamere asked. "You don't surely come into a lady's room at 12:15 and ask her for a candle?" "I do," the Major exclaimed. "Don't you understand there's a sliding panel between these rooms, and I touched the knob by accident, and I can't get it shut." And the Major disappeared once more and began to fumble with the frame of the picture. Miss Delamar came delicately across the room bearing one of her candles, and looked in upon the Major. She said maliciously, "I say, Teddy, aren't you going to admire my new dressing gown? Aren't you going to kiss me or anything? Don't you remember Simla and the Pukka Drives?" The Major recoiled from the frame, and his shadow went dancing all over the walls and the ceiling of his room. "Don't you come into this room," he said. "Don't you dare to." "Teddy," Miss Delamar said, "what's the matter with you?" "The matter with me," the Major said grimly, "is that I'm engaged to marry Miss Olympia Peabody." "Oh, Teddy," she said woefully, "I knew you were going to marry someone pretty awful. But that old mummy, oh, Teddy, that's playing it too low down. The Major said, Well, I'm not proud of it, but I've got to get this panel shut. Well, it doesn't look as if you could, Teddy, Miss Delamar said amiably. You'd better let me come in and try. Men aren't a bit of good at that sort of thing. And she came into his room and set the candle down on his dressing table. The Major moved away from the frame as if he were afraid of her. I don't believe you can do anything, he said gloomily. And what will poor Olympia say if she hears it's found open in the morning? Oh, I guess she'll have some pretty sweet things to say, Miss Delamar said with her back to him and slightly abstractedly because she was feeling along the heavily carved frame for the knob. The frame was perhaps 1.5 feet broad, of carved wood representing an inextricable tangle of bunches of grapes, roses, and thistles. The servant said, the Major continued, that it was just beside the light switch. The picture was there in its place. Noiselessly, and as if in a procession they had been drawn along on a car, the 3 fierce men, the 3 bare-shouldered, mild, blonde women, and the children occupied their places and looked dim in the light of Miss Delamar's candle. Well, it isn't, Miss Delamar said. It's a full foot above the switch. The Major, who had sprung back at the ghostly arrival of the panel, now sprang forward. Hang on to it! He exclaimed. For goodness sake, hang on to it, or we shall be caught like rats in a trap. That thing is the very devil. All right, I'm hanging on, Miss Delamar said, appearing as if she were nailed to the wall by one white raised hand. But it really isn't necessary. It's this knobby thistle thing that does the trick. Then for goodness sake, the Major repeated, do the trick and get back to your room and shut it after you, and let's have a night's rest. All right, Teddy, Miss Delamar repeated in her turn. But you might give me a minute or two, I do think. Not a minute, not a second, the Major answered hotly. It's too dangerous. We can talk tomorrow. No, we can't, Teddy, she answered. You're Olympia. You should just have seen her face when your aunt introduced me to her as your very oldest, dearest, darlingest friend. Your Olympia will jolly well see to that. No more talks for us. But it would give my aunt her death if you were found here, the Major pleaded. I don't believe it would, she said. Your aunt's too sensible for that. But I'll go if it's for her sake. I'm hanged if I would if you'd mentioned the other woman again. She moved her wrist on the frame. By Jove, Teddy, she said, I'm wiggling the button thing up and down for all I am worth, and the old panel thing doesn't move a step. The Major stepped agitatedly toward her, and she continued, It isn't a thing you press. You click it up and down like a switch. Here, you have a try. With the face full of a sort of awe, the Major began clicking the thistle-like knob, interjecting from time to time, Oh, hell! And with the awe intensified, he looked around upon Miss Delamar. It won't move, he exclaimed slowly. Miss Delamar seated herself comfortably in his armchair and kicked off her shoes. She extended her stockings to the fire. Oh, go on wiggling, I can wait, she said. The Major set his face to the wall, first on one side of the knob and then on the other. He pulled out his penknife and tried to remove what he thought might be some dirt from the workings of the thistle shank. I believe the clockwork's run down, Miss Delamar said. It must work by a spring, or it couldn't be so quiet. Don't you be too violent, or you'll break the whole blessed thing, and then we shall be in the cart. The Major tried pressing and tried pulling. He drew out his handkerchief and wiped his forehead, and then he ran his nails along the edge of the picture itself. You can kiss me if you like, Teddy, Miss Delamar's voice came to him mockingly. Then it would be quite like old times. The Major repeated, Oh, hell. No, I didn't say anything so nasty, Miss Delamar continued to mock him. I said you could kiss me. Don't you remember Simla? The Major was fumbling in his kit bag for a little oil can he always carried with him. No, I don't, he said. I don't want to. I'm not going to. He paused to recover his breath. Look here, there's no cause to open that panel again. You just get out of my room by the usual way. And at a very slight shake of Miss Delamar's head, he went on, I'll give you a pearl necklace if you'll go quietly, one I bought for poor Olympia. Again Miss Delamar shook her head. I'd like to do that Yankee in the eye, she ejaculated. But if you think Major Edward Brent Foster, late of His Majesty's 126th Regiment, that I'm going to walk all along these old corridors in the dark and black beetles... Oh, rot, the Major said. You used to walk all over Simla in the dark. But not black beetles, Teddy, Miss Delamar exclaimed. Up the bazaar and along the Chota Hazri Drive and King William Street, everywhere. You're remembering Simla now, Teddy, Miss Delamar said softly. I don't want to, but I've got to, the Major conceded, for the sake of argument. And then Miss Delamar said softly and astonishingly, Poor fellow! The Major really jumped. Don't say that, he ejaculated. That's what Mary's housemaid said. Well, you are a poor, poor fellow, Miss Delamar corroborated. Diddums want its old friend out of its little bedroom. Yes, I do, the Major said frankly. Look here, Flossie, do the decent thing and quit. I don't believe I'm very well. I've had a sort of message from Mary Seville. You heard me speak of her in Simla. Oh, I don't remember Simla, Miss Delamar said, with a toss of her head. And so this Mary Seville? I don't know, the Major said. She hasn't married. But just trot away, there's a good chap. I'll kiss you and give you the pearl necklace, too. Miss Delamar jumped out of her chair and faced him in her stockinged feet. Who wants your old kisses, and who wants your pearl necklaces? She exclaimed. Keep them for Olympia Peabody, and joy go with them. She moved toward the door, and then turned to say, I was never the one to come between a man and his fair and blushing bride. I don't want to spoil sport. I wish you all the joy you can get. All. She paused, and then she added, But you may kiss me if you want to, Teddy. The Major looked at her, and then at the fire. I don't really think I want to, Flossie, he said slowly. I don't believe I can be very well. Oh, well, Teddy, she said, with a remonstrating voice. Don't talk to me as if you were seasick and I were a pork chop. Just say you've seen the girl you really like again. Don't put it as if I didn't look good to kiss. That would damage my professional chances. The other's only a matter of my heart. Oh, Lord, no, the Major said. You're a sweet, good brick, a lump of nougat, and the prettiest girl, only I just want to get a chance to think. Miss Delamar said, Poor fellow, again, and the Major said, Don't say that. I don't like it, again in a really appealing voice, and he added, Go away as quietly as you can. All right, Teddy, she answered. I'm in my stockinged feet, and I shan't ring a fire bell. I don't in the least know whether I can find my way, but I guess I'll get in somewhere all right. For the third time the Major fell into his armchair, but this time he exclaimed, No, I can't see. Even though Flossie doesn't add anything to the problem at all, I can't see in any imaginable manner of speaking where we all... End of Part 1, Chapter 5. Read by Jeffrey Wilson, Ames, Iowa, 2022.